Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're doing well. This is the class from March the 31st. Here are the questions, as we always have to begin with. I'm going to spin the phone around and we'll get going here. Here we go. Let's find the right spot just about there. Welcome. Hold on. Get the computer out of the screen. Get this out of the way. Man, technical issues. There we go. I hope it is a good day so far, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're having a good week. Hope the coronavirus in no way has touched you, your family, anyone you know. I have been lucky so far, touch wood in that sense. I hope that continues on. I hope at some point we are back to our normal lives. Crossed fingers here. Okay, let's talk housekeeping details before we dive into the world that is Andy Jackson. Okay, so right off the bat, assignments. The new questions for this week are here. I am still grading questions from last week. That is to say the work due here later on today on Monday, as well as the first week. Overall, I'd say I'm running at about 70% on the homework coming in. There are some people who I haven't heard anything from. I've reached out to everyone, and some people responded back and others did not. So overall, I'm trying to make bridges of communication here. I'm trying to keep people going. And I know that there are a wide variety of reasons why the work might not be done. I get it. It is a crazy, chaotic, weird time. So whatever the message is that you need to get to me, I understand completely. The college has pushed back the date upon which you can drop the class and still get a W. That date was supposed to be last week, Friday. It's been moved forward, I believe, a couple of weeks now. I'm not in any way encouraging anyone to leave the class. I would love it if we all stayed, if we all did well. So please keep that in mind. But by the same token, let's make sure we're turning in the work. Let's make sure that we are staying in contact in that sense. If there's anything that I can do, I hope you're reaching out to me. If you're looking at your grade and you're thinking, what's my grade look like? I don't understand it. Keep in mind that we're really dealing with total points here out of 1,000. So take all the points you've scored thus far, add them up, and that's where you stand if you stopped doing work in the class right now, which you're not going to do. You're going to keep working for the next handful of weeks here, and you're going to get yourself as high up as you want to go. And keep in mind, we still have a number of weeks of things to go. So please, turn things in. If you have individual questions about how you're doing in the class or you're worried about anything, you know how to get in contact with me. A reminder, there's no class next week. Next week is our spring break, which feels weird because it seems like we've been on a sort of spring break here for a number of days, but we have not. Keep in mind, this is a very different realm of things that we head into, okay? Now, to deal with the material for this week, I'm going to put aside my agenda here. You go over there. I'm going to bring my slides back over there. Now, I have over here on the side my slides from this evening, and I'll be turning over here quite a bit for the first portion in order to look at the two Electoral College presidential maps from 1824 and 1828. These are two very interesting elections for us, so I need to be able to look over here. I say on the agenda to print out the slides, and perhaps you have, but if you haven't, at the very least, looking at the images is going to make things a little bit more sensible. So if you can hear me and see that, I think we're in for an overall better time. Tonight we'll go through 1824. We'll see Andrew Jackson get elected in 28 and then re-elected in 32 and follow him through the rise of an opposition party. If you're wondering why there's not a ton of slides, keep in mind that when we went on our COVID-19 break, we really had about 8 weeks of class meetings left, but a number of those class meetings were test meetings. So over the course of the 8 weeks, we now took 5 classes and spread them out. So some of them are thinner than others. And this week, it really fits on one page here of about 5 slides, and a few of them are images. So if you think to yourself, wow, it looks like a shorter span of time, in a way it could, okay? But let's dive in on this first map here on 1824. If you're looking where I'm looking, you'll see it looks like a patchwork. It is a bit of a shuffling mess. And here's what's happening. In 1824, there's really one dominant political party. That's that party of Jefferson. The Federalist Party, the other party, if you like, of American politics, has been driven out of existence and is gone. And therefore, you have 4 guys running for the presidency from really within inside the same party. They might have certain regional or sectional differences, like we talked about last week, that antebellum sectionalism, but you don't end up really with opposing political parties. And that's going to mean a lot of crossover voting. In other words, when I look at this map, I look at John Quincy Adams, for instance. Adams is the son of former President John Adams. He's from the Northeast, and look at how well he does in the Northeast. That's his section of the nation. Okay, that idea of sectionalism is going to come back for us here as Adams does so well there. Now, a little bit of background as well. Adams is the Secretary of State to the present president, James Monroe. Now, why does that matter? Secretary of State in the early years of the American government is the on-deck circle of the American presidency. If you really want to be the president of the United States, Secretary of State is the job you want. Think about this. The Secretary of State is the chief diplomat. They're the person who does most of the foreign affairs. And the early conception of the American government was that Congress would handle the heavy lifting of the domestic affairs, that is to say, inside the United States, and the presidency would be up to the foreigners, right? That would be the nation's diplomat to the foreign powers. So Thomas Jefferson is the first Secretary of State and goes on to be president. And then after that, there's a really nice, tight timeline of things. If you look at Jefferson's Secretary of State, it's James Madison, who then becomes president. And then if you look at Madison's Secretary of State, it's James Monroe, who then becomes president. And then if you look at Monroe's Secretary of State, it's John Quincy Adams, who in a moment here is going to become president. So there's this really tight timeline of Secretary of State leading to the presidency. Okay, so John Adams, Secretary of State, Northeasterner, doing really well. Back to my map. The rest of the country is jumbled around a little bit. To introduce some of the characters to you, Henry Clay of the West. You'll notice that Clay does pretty well in the West. His native Kentucky and Ohio come through pretty well as Missouri. William Crawford, who may be a name you don't know. Crawford was the guy a lot of people thought was going to win this election. He's the favorite of a lot of former big-name American politicians. Monroe and Madison both like him. Unfortunately for Crawford, he suffers a whopper of a stroke soon after his nomination, and a lot of people voting begin to question whether or not Crawford could actually do it, and therefore he's going to suffer in that sense. We see him do all right here, but not great. And then the other one who's winning in a lot of different places is the General Andrew Jackson, who we mentioned last week as the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. Now, Jackson is a political outsider in that sense. He is not in any way someone who's unknown. In fact, he's probably the best known national candidate. And in American history, that happens for us a number of times. Big name generals have an ability of selling themselves and not having to do it politically. I'll give you some examples. After World War II, when things are dicey during the Cold War, the nation's going to turn to Dwight Eisenhower, who was a general in World War II, had never been a political elected individual in any sense, but is seen as being this national stable figure, much in the same way Ulysses Grant after the Civil War, George Washington at the founding of the nation. We think military leaders as a nation are a good turning point because, generally speaking, they've managed a large thing, right? They've run an army. They haven't had to get elected to political office, but in our eyes, an executive like the president, much like a general in an army, we think that those two things go well together. So Jackson's name is well known throughout the nation. To the results. The popular vote total I will only point out because it shows us that Jackson gets the most popular votes. Now, you know that that's not what decides the presidency, right? 2016 will tell you that. But look at the Electoral College vote, where Jackson gets the most, followed by John Quincy Adams, and then thirdly Crawford, and lastly Henry Clay. No one gets a majority. No one has won, right? What happens in 1824 is the election is then thrown into the House of Representatives, where the members will vote by state. In other words, each state will cast one vote for the presidency of the United States among the three top Electoral College vote getters. So in other words, what was a 4-person field narrows to a 3-person field. Henry Clay is pulled out of that electoral possibility, and what happens now is sometimes remembered as the corrupt bargain. Henry Clay is going to go to John Quincy Adams and say, hey, Quincy, what if I give you my states and you become the president of the United States. And in return, you make me the Secretary of State. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that's the on deck circle. That is the next in line job. Of course, I'd like that deal. So Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams organize a bargain by which John Quincy Adams becomes the president and Clay becomes the Secretary of State. Now, when word gets out, the person the most angry about it is Andrew Jackson, who, looking at the popular vote total, I got the most, looking at the Electoral College vote, I got the most, gets absolutely robbed of the presidency. And this is an important moment for us in American politics because, let's go to 1828. Andrew Jackson is going to spend the next 4 years trying to win the presidency of the United States. Why do I put that emphasis there? Because up until now, you really weren't supposed to try in that way. You know, today we see people out there campaigning and say, hey, how's it going? Shaking hands, kissing babies. I'm doing everything I can do to win the presidency. That's not what you're supposed to do in the early days. That's considered undignified. You're supposed to run, and then your representatives go out and sort of curry up state representatives for you. You don't put on a show. But Jackson has been robbed, scorned, and he is done with this system. Jackson hires as his political go-to a man named Martin Van Buren. Van Buren will go on to be president after Andrew Jackson. And Van Buren is from New York. He is sometimes referred to as the Little Magician. He has organized in New York this political party movement, which is the first of its kind in American history. What does it do? It's pretty simple. It's what people do now. They have slogans and parades, and they get newspaper ads out there, and they have songs and barbecues, and they attack candidates who they don't like, right? Jackson is going to spend 4 years convincing the average common man that the greatest thing that threatens the United States of America is not a foreign power, it's the snakes within our own house. It is people like John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. For the remainder of Clay's life, Andrew Jackson refers to that man as the Judas of the West, that he sold out the Southern Western interests in order to pursue his own political career in the future. Clay is going to run for president a number of times, and every single time, Andrew Jackson is going to be there trying to make sure that man does not win the presidency. It is a commitment of spite to basically say, I am not going to allow you to succeed because you hosed me in 1824. So the big change here between 24 and 28 is that Jackson goes out and convinces the common people this is something you should care about. How do we see that? I want to go back to my charts for a moment. Look at the popular vote total in 1828. You looking? Gotta look. 1.15 million people voted in 1828. Go back to 1824. 356,000. Holy moly. Andrew Jackson chased the vote out. 4 times as many people voted in the 1828 election. Jackson got people to care about the issue. He convinced them that he was their president, that the nation was not going to be stolen away by dandies, by elitists, by the rich, by the well-to-do, the privileged, the aristocratic, whatever word you want to use. The people like John Quincy Adams and that snake Judas, Henry Clay, that's who we have to avoid. And how do we avoid that? We avoid that by you coming out and voting for me, Andrew Jackson, and I will then become the president of the United States. Okay? So there's a question on our question list this week that sort of talks about the differences in those election cycles there. So hopefully that helped us to clarify that question. Let's go on to our next slide. A little bit about Andrew Jackson before we go any further. Jackson is, by his own definition, an outsider. He does not come from one of the big, powerful states that had kind of fueled the revolutionary presidents early on. Guys like George Washington and Jefferson and Madison Monroe were all from Virginia, and John Quincy Adams and John Adams were both from Massachusetts. Jackson's from Tennessee, and he sees himself as an outsider. He arrives in Washington, D.C. very much alone. It's kind of a sad tale. Jackson had been married, and over the course of his married life, he had no natural-born children. He adopted one son who passes away as well. But when he arrives in Washington, D.C., he is fresh off an election that a month later was followed by the death of his wife. And so he arrives in Washington, D.C., feeling acutely already as though he is someone who is scorned. He was scorned in 1824. He feels like luck or fate, if you will, has kind of taken his life partner from him. And Jackson arrives and feels as though he has to try and make a new way of doing things in Washington, D.C. Now, the picture I have here, I want you to look closely at it. Look at it. That is, in fact, a wheel of cheese. On Inauguration Day, 1829, one of the supporters of Andrew Jackson gave him an enormous wheel of cheese, like you do. And Jackson, knowing nothing else to do with the wheel of cheese, put it in the opening doorway, the foyer, if you will, of the White House, and invited the people of America round to see him, to have some cheese. Come on by, see the president, shake some hands, have some cheese. And the people of America came. And at the end of the day, as you might imagine, the cheese was gone, the carpets were wrecked, the drapes were torn, some furniture was busted, and notably someone says to the president, "Mr. President, the people have ruined your house." And Jackson, and this tells you everything you'll ever need to know, replies, "No, they didn't. They ruined their house. It's not my house. It's their house." Jackson believes that he is the man of the common people of the United States, that he represents the voice of an America that does not have a voice on the elite, aristocratic, well-to-do past of American presidents, that he's a different fellow. Now, let's not get this wrong. Jackson is a pretty wealthy guy. He has an enormous estate. He's not going to talk about that, though. He wants to tell you about his common roots, right? You've been in a duel? Me too. You like gambling? I love it. You like to bet on horses? Yes, that's right, I do. You like to chase women a little bit in your earlier days? Me too, says Andrew Jackson. I am like you. I'm a common fella. I'm just an average guy, and that's the America I'm going to make. An America that is responsive to the needs of the common man. A sign of that, what becomes known as the spoil system. When Jackson arrives in D.C., he brings with him a lot of North Carolina, Tennessee folk. People who are part of his world, who he wants to be part of the Washington world. He's not going to show up and really suddenly start being like, who should I pick as the secretary of fill in the blank? This guy's a really rising star of the party. I should harness his power for me. No, Jackson's going to bring his people. Who helped me get elected? Who, along with Martin Van Buren and all of these people, helped me to become the president of the United States? That's my people. He'll have a cabinet, like any president has a cabinet, but he also has, notably in Jackson style, a kitchen cabinet. And that is a group of about 5 good old boys from back home in Tennessee who sit in his kitchen every morning and drink coffee. We got a judge, we got a newspaper reporter, we got an old lawyer friend, an old politician. Those are the people who come with him to keep him grounded. That's who Jackson has kind of surrounding him so that he can say, help me out with this. How are we going to figure out this problem that we need to solve on a national level? Jackson's going to award these jobs in a way that becomes normal today, right? Imagine this, put it in very 2020 terms. Let's say, for instance, in 2020, the presidential election is not won by Donald Trump. No one in the Trump administration is going to have the opportunity to then stick around in the, let's say, Biden administration, right? You're not going to be like, hey, I know I was press secretary for President Donald Trump, but President Biden, would you like me to still do that job? Heck no. We've got this guy who's been slugging the campaign for 18 months and sleeping on the floor of Iowa motels and trekking his butt across the nation. That's my press secretary. I'm not going to give the job to somebody who has no loyalty to me. Jackson introduces this system of spoils. Now, the criticism of it is, are these people we want having those jobs? That's a fair question. Is this a job that the average man from the Tennessee Hill Country can do? Or is it a job that is beyond that person? We'll talk more about that criticism later, okay? I put down here that Jackson is very popular in the North among lower class and immigrant voters. He is a person who generally believes in what we might call moral freedom. If you'd like to drink, go ahead and have a drink, right? If you're an Irish immigrant who's having a great time and drinking away, that's something that Jackson would be like, that's America. You take advantage of that opportunity. In the South, Jackson's pro-slavery voice is going to lend him a lot of support. You look at this map from 1828, looking back at it, that's a pretty thorough victory. He wins 56% of the popular vote, 2/3 of the electoral college vote. Jackson, I beg your pardon, Adams, holds on to some support in the Northeast, as you can imagine. That's his part of the world. But otherwise, Jackson has ridden to a tremendous victory here. He's a very popular fellow in that way, okay? Now, I want to talk, as we head into this next slide that says the Jackson presidency here, about two examples of Jackson and what he does. And before I say this, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but when you move into the White House, one of the things that you choose as the President of the United States is the art on the walls and the furniture and the rugs and all of this stuff, right? So one of the decisions that President Trump made when he came into the office was this: I want the portrait of Andrew Jackson on the wall. Now, putting a portrait of a president on the Oval Office wall is nothing new. That's absolutely down the road what you're going to do. Because when you become president of the United States, one of the things you want to do as an homage, as a tribute to other presidents is say, who is it that I recognize as being important in my political ideals and my political career? And so you might be like, get me Lincoln, and get me, I don't know, Lyndon Johnson maybe, and then I really have a strong affinity to people from the state of California, get me Ronald Reagan, or something like that. President Trump has Andrew Jackson on the wall, which from a party standpoint doesn't make a lot of sense, because Jackson is the sort of central Democrat. When you think of the Democrat image, that donkey is, pardon my French, but that's a stubborn ass. That's what that is. That image is originated for the Democratic Party under the leadership of Andrew Jackson. Jackson is stubborn. He's strong. He's simple, but he is not going to bend to your will. And that is where that donkey comes from. So Jackson's a Democrat. President Trump, as you know, is a Republican. But here's the connection. They're both men who say, I speak for those who don't speak. I speak for the America that is too quiet, that has been pushed to the borders by the loud noise of everybody else. In Jackson's case, he's saying, common man of America, I'm your guy. I am here to represent a country that was ignored by the John Quincy Adams set of America. President Trump made a lot of noise when he arrived in 2016 about draining the swamp and getting rid of a lot of the career people in Washington, D.C., and kind of creating a new image of what government would look like. So that is why on the Trump Oval Office wall, you get an image of Andrew Jackson. Jackson, in both of the instances we're about to talk about, acts in a way that we would call extra legal. In other words, beyond the law. Now, isn't that the same as illegal holiday? Well, that's a question of measures and a question of whether or not you want to say that is illegal or not. But what Jackson's about to do here in both instances go beyond the law. And what Jackson would say to you is, I am doing that because it's what's best for the people. Don't talk to me about checks and balances and limits on power. That's not what this is about. This is what's doing what's best for the American people. And there's a strain of that in the Trump presidency. I am not in any way trying to say that the Trump presidency has broken laws or acted in an extra legal way. But President Trump, a lot of the time, talks about cutting through red tape, getting rid of bureaucracy, doing what's right in a way that's Jacksonian in its inspiration. Okay, so there's a comparison to be had there, right? So here we go, the Jacksonian presidency. Two instances I want to talk about. Number one, the Native Americans. If you know anything at all about Andrew Jackson, you probably associate him with the Trail of Tears, and that's where we're headed here, is the forced removal of the Native American tribes of the southeastern part of the United States. If you look at the map here for a moment with me, if you're having a look-see, you can see the territory we're talking about in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. 5 Native American tribes that are going to be removed from that land. And Jackson would say to you their removal is necessary because that's land best settled by American farmers. That's what they should be doing with that land. It should not be Native Americans. Jackson's idea is that that land is the birthright of Americans and immigrants to the country who shall use it in order to grow whatever crop they choose. It's probably going to be cotton, and prosper off of it. Native Americans do not have the citizenship requirements in his eyes to sit on that land. And so Jackson is going to remove them from it. Okay? In 1830, Jackson has a law passed called the Indian Removal Act. Now, this law, keep in mind, makes it all the way through Congress. This is a law that has the absolute support of the executive branch, the legislative branch. We'll talk about the judicial in a moment. Okay? And the law, in essence, says, Native Americans, we're going to trade you millions of acres of land in the southeast, the land you currently have, for millions of acres of land, as well as a hefty payment of money for you to move over into what is today, present day Oklahoma, and what will later on become part of a little bit of Kansas, a little bit of Arkansas in there too. Now, you can see the trails of people moving because that's eventually what's going to happen here. But the fascinating side of the story is that obviously the Native Americans don't want to go. That's one of the readings we have this week, is hearing the Cherokee people appeal. And it's the Cherokees who really come the closest to putting the stop to this. The Cherokees not only write about their objection, but they take it to the highest court in the land. Right? The Cherokee people appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States and say, we have rights. We are a sovereign people of the United States. We live under the protection of the federal government of the United States. That's the agreement that Native tribes had made shortly after the foundation of the United States. You can't just kick us off the land willy-nilly. You certainly can't kick us to somewhere that we know is not nearly as prosperous as this. In other words, this land we're on right now is lucrative land. We understand that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to kick us off of it. If it was horrendous land, that is to say not very arable or productive, you wouldn't be kicking me off of it. But the fact that you are kicking me off of it says to me, this is land that is obviously of some great use to you, and so you want me off of it. Now the Supreme Court weighs in and says, you know what? You're right. The Supreme Court here, under the leadership of John Marshall, that old Federalist who has been sitting now on the bench for a good 30 plus years, says, you're right. The federal government doesn't have the right to kick you off of that land. You have a right to stay. And you know what Andrew Jackson says? No, you don't. Right? This is that moment that's extra legal. Jackson is going to say, this is the famous line, John Marshall has made his decision. Now let's see him enforce it. What Jackson is saying is, I am the president of the United States, and what's standing behind me over here is the Army of the United States. I am the commander-in-chief of it. It's going to move the natives. John Marshall, what you got, boss? Have an army? No, you don't. You don't have an army. So you can tell me that that's the ruling of the Supreme Court, and I'm going to say, away they go. And this is one of those moments, as I said, where Jackson's supporters would be like, yeah, look at him, doing that good for the common man. Critics are going to say, what the heck? We have a constitution. There are laws in this nation. You can't simply do as you wish. You can't just wipe away the laws and jump over the limitations of the government. That's not the way this works. So again, if you're a fan of Jackson's, this is a moment of real. If, on the other hand, you are a critic of Jackson, this is one of the moments that probably brought you to being a critic of Andrew Jackson, if not confirmed it for you, okay? On the other side, Jackson and the National Bank. As you will read about in one of the documents, Andrew Jackson hates the National Bank. Nothing more fully embodies the hatred of northern aristocratic wealthy interests than his hatred of that bank. He sees the bank as the plaything of wealthy Americans used to cripple the American farmer. How would they do that, Holiday? Just a little aside then. Jackson thinks that the National Bank sets up an economic climate that is best and really responsive to New England merchants and New York merchants, not the common small farmer of the South. Jackson's thought is that the government in the North, in that sense, the bank in the North, is making policies that best serve the business of the North, not the business of the South, and he wants it gone. The bank is set to expire in 1836. It's on a 20-year charter, or permission, if you like, from 1816 to 1836. Andrew Jackson is running for re-election in 1832. If Andrew Jackson does nothing else, and he gets re-elected, he will serve to the presidency in 1836. The bank will expire in 1836, and that will be the end of it. There will be no bank. But that's not good enough for Andrew Jackson. It is not simply good enough for him to say, I will watch this thing go to its last living days and die of natural causes, in a sense, right, at the end of its 20 years. I will kill it before then. Who will I kill it for? All my common supporters out there. I will do this for you. I will take out the Bank of the United States in order to help you, my common supporters. And that is Jackson in its style, right? It's action. It's not, I'm just going to kind of wait and let it die. It's going to die. No. I want to take it out. So Jackson tells his supporters this. If you vote for me in 1832, which, by the way, they're going to anyway, if you vote for me in 1832, then I will put forward that as a mandate to destroy the national bank. And he eventually does that. He does so by removing the money from the bank. Once he's elected president, the bill comes across his desk. He's going to veto it. He's going to destroy the Bank of the United States 2 years really before it was set to die anyway. Not much of a death in that sense, but he can say, I killed it. Now, the subscript of this is that by destroying the National Bank of the United States, Andrew Jackson takes a step towards hurting the U.S. in the long run, right? Jackson's presidency is going to run out in 36, and then his successor is going to be Martin Van Buren. And Van Buren has the unfortunate circumstance of showing up as the nation's economy, because of the death of the bank, is hitting the skids. The reason that happens is because without a national bank, the states are in charge of loaning money, and a lot of them went out and just loaned. And the currency got incredibly inflated, a lot of the loans went bad, and the nation went into an economic collapse, so much so that people's criticism of Martin Van Buren was that they called him Martin Van Ruin. Ooh, that hurts. Okay? Not really Van Buren's fault, Jackson's fault, to be honest with you. But the sort of thing that Jackson would say, it's worth it if it does what's best for the common man. I don't know, Mr. President, you got like 20% unemployment. Is that best? I don't know. That's a bit of a toss-up, okay? By this point, people were getting tired of the Andrew Jackson routine. And if I look at the last slide here tonight, I beg your pardon, it says the rise of the Whigs. The Whigs are a political party in American history. And you might have said to yourself, is that a real thing? We had a Whig as a political party? We did. We, in fact, had a couple of Whig presidents. More on them later. Okay? But the Whigs rise up to challenge Andrew Jackson. The naming of the party. In English history, the group of individuals chiefly responsible for fighting the power of the king was the Whig Party. And so over the course of history in England, the Whigs were known for their objection to monarchical power, or the power of the monarch. Hence the borrowing of the name here. When the group of individuals who make the American Whig Party call themselves the Whig Party, they do so in a way that says, we will challenge centralized authority. What do the Whigs not like? They don't like the way Andrew Jackson has put himself up on a pedestal in order to make himself the one true power of America. They don't like that monarchy set. If you look at the image, have a look at the image, it's a very famous image here of Andrew Jackson. It says King Andrew I at the bottom. So this is a Whig propaganda cartoon talking about Andrew Jackson's presidency. Born to command. You see Jackson, he's got a crown, he's got the scepter of state, he's got the power of the veto in his hand. No president up until this point had vetoed as many pieces of legislation as Jackson had vetoed. Yeah, he also has underneath his feet the torn up Constitution of the United States and the Charter of the U.S. Bank. It is a cartoon meant to make me feel an anger towards Andrew Jackson. And as I said, it's a Whig piece. The Whigs, for that matter, are really a group of individuals who oppose everything about Jackson's vision of government. Jackson believed, as we said a moment ago, in the system of spoils, in bringing in the common man to do the government job. The Whigs would say to you, no, governing is hard work. It's an educated man's job. It's not something the average person should be doing, and therefore we need elite, skilled individuals in that job. Jackson is probably more willing to say to his constituents, do what you want to do. Have a little bit of freedom. You want to drink? Have some drink. You want to own slaves? Own some slaves. The Whigs, on the other hand, see themselves as moral improvers. They're do-gooders in that sense, constantly trying to hew away at being better and more educated and smarter. I'll give you a weird one, but this makes sense, so follow me. Today, the Whig Party still exists, and its symbol is the owl, right? The Democrats are the donkey, the Republicans are the elephant. The Whig symbol is the owl, which makes sense, right? Because what does an owl do? It sits there, and it's like, I'm smarter than you. That's what owls think. They're really known as being like really observant, and they are wise. That's the Whig Party perception. We're wise. We know more than other people do. So the Whig objection to Andrew Jackson is you shouldn't behave the way you behave. You should have some moral background as an individual. The president should have standards. The Whigs want to see a president who really isn't the centerpiece of the government. The Whigs imagine the Congress doing the heavy lifting and the president more as a figurehead. It says something about who the Whig presidents are, right? When we go down the road here, there will be 2 Whig presidents of the United States. William Henry Harrison, who's elected in 1840 and is a military hero, and then later on Zachary Taylor, also a Whig. Both Whig presidents, military heroes, national figures, who the Whig real leadership, guys like Henry Clay, are going to say, listen, I don't need you to get out there and Andrew Jackson it. In fact, that's the last thing I need you to do. If you go out there and be the figurehead of the party, we'll write the legislation back here in the Congress, and we'll hand it to you, Mr. President, and you just rubber stamp that sucker. Rubber stamping. That's what I need from a Whig president. Smiling, reputation, and rubber stamping. That's a good Whig president. Okay, Jackson, on the other hand, would say, no. I know better than everyone else in the room. I represent the sort of central mind think of everyone. I will make the key decisions. So big gap there between the Whig philosophy of doing things and Jackson's philosophy of doing things. All right? Now, I want to bring back the questions just to put them here at the end of the video. So if you'll allow me the awkwardness of turning this around. There we go, one last time. Folks, as I said at the outset, these questions are due next week, Monday, but then we don't have a class for another week after that. So I will see you in a couple weeks' time. Take care out there. Let me know if I can do anything. All the best to you.